right, we're ready to roll. Thank you all for coming today to the 2024 Itsec Fellow presentation. My name is Brian Holmes. I am the chair of the Itsec Fellows Committee, that super secret group that meets behind closed doors and selects the best of the best, all right? So I want to thank you all for coming here to recognize one of our industry's finest. We're here to recognize Dr. Winston Wink Bennett, a longtime MS&T person of note, right? If you haven't seen his picture down on the north end of the concourse here as you're heading back toward the Hyatt, he is a member of the NCS Modeling and Simulation Hall of Fame, and we've selected him for his contributions to the state-of-the-art in simulation, modeling, simulation, and training, particularly in the fields of live, virtual, and constructive simulation. So this prestigious recognition is something we give out every year to a person that has made seminal contributions to the state-of-the-art in our industry. And we're here to recognize Wink this year. And so thanks to my fellow committee's members for your assistance this year in helping get this to the finish line. And without further ado, let's recognize the 2024 Itsec Fellow, Dr. Wink Bennett.
Thanks a lot, thanks. Okay, so there's no laptop like there is in all the rehearsal rooms, just pointing that out. So I'm gonna step away from the podium and chat. So I'll say up front that I tend to deliver at a fairly high bit rate, so there should be plenty of time for any questions that you have since it's 90 minutes. The second thing I want to say is this is a really big room, just a giant room. Thankfully, you guys are all in the middle. But I did want to say, I once caught a fish this big. See, it only resonates with a few. Okay, that's great. I must be old. So that's me. I left the AFRL in March of 24. Took a couple months off to injure myself doing DIY projects and do some private consulting work, and then went to work for Rich Tempolsky and the team in the DAF Chief Modeling and Simulation Office for SAIC. Really happy to be there. They've given me some great opportunities to do some really cool stuff. I'm very grateful for that. And you'll hear about some of those things today, but you'll mostly hear about all the things that we've done in the past and all the people that we've gotten to work with. Even though I'm standing here, Dr. Wink Bennett, in front of you today, really the stuff I'm going to talk about is a big team effort. So 20 or 30 years, many of you in the room in various roles and responsibilities you had over time were partners and collaborators. And a lot of the things that I'm talking about here really are about the teams and the villages that we've all been a part of that made things great and made a huge difference for the Air Force and some of our coalition partners. And I'm proud to be in front of you today, but just take credit for being a part of where we are. And thank you very much for all of that then and moving forward. So just a little history on me. I also tend to put Pico font on slides, so I try to cram as much content into them as I can. So there won't be a quiz, and I won't go through all this, but I'll start at the end first. So now I work as a senior modeling and simulation advisor through SAIC for Rich Tempolsky and the CMSO team. But I started working for the Air Force Research Lab when it was called the Human Resources Directorate in 1984. That's right. The Earth hadn't quite cooled yet, and so I started working in 1984 for them as a summer intern. And at the end of the summer, I guess they liked something because they said, would you mind sticking around? We have this new position that we've created, and we think you'd be good for it. It's a developmental position. So you start out as a GS7, then you go to a 9, and you go to 11. When I got to an 11, they said, so you're as far as you can go. We're going to send you to school, get a PhD. So I competed for a slot to go to school. I got picked and chose Texas A&M, Gig'em. And so it never looked back. So it was a really great opportunity. I came back from that tour to Brooks Air Force Base. Brooks was closing at the time. Keep that in mind. It comes up again. And so fortunately, I was offered a position with the folks out of Mesa, Arizona, who were working at what used to be a Williams Air Force Base. I know a lot of you guys know that place too. And so my family and I moved out to Williams. My wife got a really nice job with the state of Arizona, so we moved out there. and I worked there at the Mesa facilities. I wasn't a tactical training guy. Those of you that knew me early in my career, I was a space, medical, maintenance kind of guy, intelligent tutoring stuff, task analysis stuff. Nothing having to do with fighter aircraft, at least the top end of them. I could tell you how to fix them, but I couldn't tell you how to fly them. And then they asked me to take on the flying stuff. And again, never looked back. So our team there at the Mesa Research Site, we did really great things. I know some folks in the room actually came out there to fly with us for some of the training research trials that we had. And then in 2010, they finished bracking Williams Air Force Base and told us we were moving. See the pattern here? And so they said, we're moving, and at the time, the discussion was whether we move here to Orlando or we move to Dayton, Ohio. Well, Dayton, Ohio won, and so we moved to Dayton, Ohio. We got to design our own facility in Ohio, which never happens, and we built a purpose-built facility for the things that we were doing. And even today, though I'm not there anymore, the people that are carrying on the great research that we were doing there, that facility is now being leveraged by a whole new set of customers, a whole new set of capabilities, the new PEO for training, for example, the folks that are doing JSE, and the modeling and simulation, the Department of the Air Force Modeling and Simulation Office with their Modeling Simulation Integration Lab are leveraging the capabilities that are there now, working with folks like Lynn Gunzelman and Dave Malik, who took over from me, and are doing great things for the Air Force. So it's been a great career. I'm happy to have had it. Thank you again to all of you for being partners and collaborators, and here we go. These are some of the topics I'm going to talk about, but one of the things that got drilled into my head early on, which I feel very fortunate about, was the mentors I had were all about doing great science and technology. So you had to know your science, but the idea was to do that science in the scope of work for an operational customer, right from the start. So do the researchy things, but do them within the context of the actual end user or the person that's supposed to take the technology and adopt it and use it at the end. That turned out to be something that stuck with me and the people I've collaborated with over the last 30 years, and it's the right way to do business because you can have success, you can demonstrate the art of the possible to the operators that are going to use the technology, and then they're there on the other side to pick it up when you transition it. It's a great way to do business. The video in the corner is from a project that got started during COVID out at our division. It's called JITMA, Just-in-Time Multi-Mission Airman Warfighter. It's a program that Dave Malik then took over and passed it on to Stephen McGee, who's working it now. But this is work they did last summer to look at deployable technology for ACE, if you're familiar with Agile Combat Employment, how to get AR, VR technologies and the content to go with it out, deploy the knowledge out to the point of need at the far end of the spear. And they did a summer engagement and exercise where they took the technology out and did what? Put it in front of the operators to get feedback, to understand what the constraints and opportunities were with them, come back and rebuild it so they can move it forward, move it in the future. So a lot of good things happened while I was there and a lot more to come. So there's plenty more to get after, and we'll talk about some of the opportunities that they get towards the end. So everybody knows the current situation. There's a lot of things happening around the world. One of the things that I'm especially happy about is even though our adversaries are getting close to technological parity if they don't already have it, the thing that differentiates us and always has been is the way we train and the way we have our people perform in the field. The technology is great, but if you know how to use it better than the bad guys, it can be the same technology. You'll use it in some new and creative ways that they don't even think about. And so our training and the research that we did was always focused on optimizing that human element in the context of the actual technologies that they have. And so the battle space is continuing to move around. Everything the last 2 years have taught us lots of things about what an evolution in the battlefield can look like with the war in Ukraine. There's lots of people out there that want to challenge us. A lot of people want to take us down. And I think the thing that will separate us is our ability to use modeling and simulation to make our warfighters more cognitively agile, more flexible, and able to move very quickly to the next big thing without a whole lot of retraining or adaptation. So that's a real key thing. I think it differentiates us and our coalition partners from everybody else, and it's what keeps us ahead of them in the game. So another point is the things that are some of the pivot points, and I won't go through these all, but one of the things that is most central to a lot of the work that we talked about, and I'll mention more today, is data is king. Having the right kind of data, being able to capture data from the context that are relevant to the warfighter is a huge deal. And some of the technologies I'll talk about today that we created are ones that actually go after that in many ways. Brian mentioned LVC. We figured out a way to harvest human performance aircraft, very precise data off the aircraft systems, couple that with what's going on in the sim and be able to paint a nice picture and a debrief for everyone who's flying, irregardless of the platform. Now today on the floor, I've walked around today, there are several companies, I'm happy to see this, that have similar kinds of capabilities that they offer in the commercial marketplace. Check it out, take a look at them, because there's some really good stuff going on and lots of great things for you to take advantage of. Things have evolved in a really nice way in terms of data and data harvesting and telling a story with data on what the best things are training. I mentioned already that the human performance is the most important thing, and we'll talk about some of the technologies that we've worked on when I was in the lab and some of the things that the CIMSO office is continuing to push on that keep that out in the front. So the last thing I'll mention is the DoD's digital engineering strategy and goals. And I won't walk all the way through this, I promise, but human digital representation in digital engineering activities is a key thing. And trying to build human-based capabilities into this DoD strategy is a thing that we were working on. It's a thing that I think will resonate with most of the people in the room. And here are just some examples. Transform a culture in the workforce. So STEM, focusing STEM on the kind of things that the future workforce is going to need to have to support warfighting in the 21st century and beyond. Those are critical things. Those are digital things. But they have a human element. Establishing infrastructure and environments. A lot of folks in the room here have grappled with how you get a secure network established and then keep it going without having to re-engineer the network every 6 or 9 months because there's a new authority. So trying to get after that are things that we did in the lab and things that a lot of people are challenged with today. We just had a meeting this morning with the RAF and that whole network infrastructure and security and capacity to do things agilely is a real challenge for us now. We really need to get after that and get that fixed. And then some of the other things we were working on was what are the common data specs for not only human performance, but how to do V&V on the fly, pun intended, and making sure we have those kind of things in place to grapple with that and have the ecosystem necessary to capture those data. And so we came up with this chart several years ago. I'm deeply indebted to a PhD. Her name is Jean McMillan. Jean McMillan was one of the founding members of Aptima, and she came up with a very simple version of this chart to help us sort of capture all the different equities and areas of interest we were working on in the science and technology side of our work. Now it's been updated quite a few times, and it's been updated so many times and gotten so jazzy that people call it the chutes and ladders chart. And so, but what I like about it is that it really kind of walks through the systematic process that we've used over the last couple of decades to build the learning engineering ecosystem that we have now. And like I said, there's lots of tools you can see on the floor today of capabilities that represent the components of this, which I'm going to walk through now. So I mentioned when I first got started, one of the things that they had me work on was a lot of stuff about task analysis. And we worked very closely with folks at Air Education and Training Command, now soon to be Airman Development Command, to create ways to understand the workflow of people who were doing enlisted tasks in the Air Force, be able to capture those data, automate those data, but create a very efficient process. So today, doing automated surveys it's pro forma. Everybody does that. But back in the day, we had 3.5-inch floppy disks and very fat laptops, and we literally went around the Air Force using those disk drives and those laptops to actually work with subject matter experts in the field to collect occupational survey data in a much more rapid and much more efficient way. We could audit the data in real time because the computer could monitor. And then be able to do more important things with those data. And we had some really great successes. But that notion of getting the requirements right up front and having those requirements be set up in such a way that they not only could give you clues on how to design your training scenarios, but then also how to measure and how to provide feedback. Those things were all part and parcel that were baked into the front end of this as a feed for the rest of the ecosystem that we created. And so so we came up with an approach. I think many of you are aware of it. It's called the Mission Essential Competencies approach. It doesn't really matter whether you pick our approach called MEX or you pick your own task analysis approach. The importance is going through the process. The importance is getting that level of specificity in the data. It's really important. And if you do that right, everything else in the chutes and ladders charts and everything else in your methodology falls right out from that. And so getting that right up front is critical. So we came up with this thing called Mission Essential Competencies for Air Combat Command because there wasn't a task analysis approach at the time that kind of did all that. And so, and that was because the Air Combat Command wanted to move in some pretty creative ways in terms of readiness for the future. but they had up to that point defined their readiness in terms of something called the Ready Aircrew Program, or RAP. You know, they had a set of scenarios, you flew the scenarios. If you passed the scenarios, then you were good to go. But what's going on underneath the hood on those scenarios? And so we created this process that allowed us to break down the tasks that the operational folks were doing for tactical flying into their component knowledge, skills, and developmental experiences. And then we also found out there were other components of that were important if we're going to really understand what's going on in the cranium and in the tasks that the aircrew are doing. Like I said, your drivers to get to this point might be different than ACC's were, and you might have a different approach to task analysis. Both of those things are okay. It's going through the process and keeping in mind that the process and the data are the critical things to get you started. So there's 3 parts that we created. We started out with mission essential competencies, and then air education and training, then ACC came to us and said, you know, we have these field training units, and it'd be nice if we could do the same kind of thing for field training units, knowledge, skills, experiences, and other things, and link them together. Wouldn't that be a great thing? And we actually got to work with AETC on a couple of things having to do with undergraduate pilot training. Prior to their selection of the T-7 as the trainer aircraft, we tried to come up with some of the knowledge, skills, and experiences that you need at the very basic fundamental understanding of the airplane, and then be able to build on that. And so this structure worked for us. Some of the pieces have stayed around in other forms, and we actually, the team that I left behind is working on a big project out at ACC right now with the F-22s and the T-38s that are there. I call it Reforge because that's what it used to be called. It has a new name, Supplemental Trainer Family of Systems or something like that, but Reforge is easier. And so, and they've gone through the mech process for the Raptors, and they've gone through the mechs for the first time for the aggressors that are there. And they are now building out a syllabus and scenarios and actually designing training systems to go along with that. So it's pretty cool. Ask Dave Malik about that if you want to know more. He's got all that stuff. He's over there, right there on the end. He's laughing now because I'm going to have to buy him a beer later because I threw him under the bus in public. So this is kind of a generalized scheme for a mech. So the mech is something very large called force organization. I'll go down to the knowledge and skills. These are representative of the things you need to know and understand and be able to do at the knowledge and skill level to execute force organization. And there are these things in the middle we call supporting competencies. If you look at other competency frameworks that have come along since, a lot of those competency frameworks might have a task basis to them, but they mostly focus on these supporting competencies, these personal attributes that are in the middle. Things like being able to manage a timeline, situational awareness, battle management, communication. If you can't talk, you're probably not going to be successful in executing the mission. And if you can't manage your timeline, probably going to run out of gas. And so these things are important, but they're more generalized kind of enablers. You have to be able to do those things in order to be able to execute the other things. And a lot of the competency models you'll see now focus on these more personological kinds of variables. Nothing wrong with that. But what we wanted to do is have a way to, if you had that level of definition already in your competency set, we could unpack that to get to some more fundamental kind of things. And then we also identified equipment that you needed to have to be able to do scenarios and training. And then these things we call developmental experiences. I'll talk a little bit more about those. They're things that are tied to developing the knowledge and skills in a framework that allows you to get good instructional outcomes and know that they got the training you wanted them to get. And so we had some good successes. So I'll be going through each part of this, and every time I get to the end of a piece of the Suits and Ladders chart, I'll talk about, we actually did some stuff, no kidding, that actually transitioned out of the Air Force and into the operational community. So we did quite a bit of mission essential competency work. We did that not only in the US, but with a lot of our coalition partners. There was something at the time called latent semantic analysis, which was a really crazy idea to use math to build understanding of language. And we were one of the first people to actually use latent semantic analysis as a way to do content analysis for tasks. One of the cool applications of that was we used latent semantic analysis to study all of the content that the medical community had for nurses, flight docs, and that kind of stuff, because they had this new concept called a critical care air transport team. And it was just a concept, but they wanted to see if they could leverage any of the existing content that had already been validated for these new teams they wanted to create. And so we used latent semantic analysis to search through thousands and thousands of records of training content, course content and especially training standards and other things. And we came up with a set of things that were already in existence that they could leverage and bring in to create a course for the critical care transport teams in something less than about a year and a half to get that all done and validated. So that was kind of a cool thing. We also did work with the Tactical Leadership Program. At the time we did it, this was Florence, Belgium. So those of you that know anything about TOP know that was a while back. But we actually built the MEC capability for them with some of our coalition partners. That they then use to re-engineer their syllabus. And as I know, they still use some of the same kind of content in their syllabus today, which is pretty cool. So the next part was, so I have all that requirements information. How do I then create the conditions of learning, right? How do I design scenarios? How do I put capabilities in a way that are focused on getting you to understand things at a very fundamental level? And eventually we get around to understanding and measuring that understanding down the road. So ACC, some of the drivers, it's an organizing scheme. I just came back from a Spartan exercise, Spartan Lightning, 24/9. I got to see some of the kind of stuff that you do in creating scenarios for learning firsthand. Really, really great stuff. The folks there have just done a great job at the UAWC, and it's going to be really exciting to see where they go next. They're investing in simulators called Phoenixes. They're a medium fidelity device. Folks at Lake and Heath in the UK and soon at Marham are getting those same devices, as well as a lot of the coalition partners. And eventually, in something called distributed synthetic training, we'll be able to stitch all those together. That's the hope. But Phoenix is a really great thing. That's what was driving the training in Spartan, the Spartan Lightning event. Really, really kind of cool stuff. But it all starts from understanding the fundamentals of what it is you need to know and what it is you need to be able to execute to get that right. And so our process was to identify what the things you needed to do were, and RAP, those of you that know Ready Aircrew program, RAP has a nice overall framing, so you can actually take the scenarios and the situations that they have in RAP, and you can break those apart and put them back together in new ways, but put them back together in ways that represent this competency-based approach. And then you can map everything back to the mission essential competencies themselves. I think there are a couple of examples in here. Yeah. So we design a scenario that would actually fill a RAP requirement or a part of a RAP requirement. So you have the MEC definition validation, you have the decomposition, the experiences or operations with friendly IADs, operating in restricted airspace, targeting responsibilities, those kind of things. And then there's skills, and those skills get triggered by the way you design the scenario. It's no rocket science to you guys in the room, but just making the process more systematic was the way to go. And then figuring out, you could figure out from the performance whether they actually had a good understanding of things like package composition, engagement criteria, those kind of things. And it really served us well. We have when I left, we had a playbook of some 400 different scenarios, all competency-based. Really a nice opportunity to pull that together. And like I said, some of this kind of design work and the measures that go along with it that we'll talk about in a minute are now in the Operational Air Force at places like Reforge up in Langley. And so some other team successes, I mentioned the Langley work we have going on right now. We've done standards, so the teams that I was working with at the time and still working with some of the folks in SIMSO today on, the standards that are out there and new standards that come along through some of the work that we did and others did, we've discovered things that needed to change in those standards. So we used a lot of the design work to figure out what those standards needed to change to and get after. That's a pretty cool thing. The whole notion of demonstrating a blended approach to training that we did in LVC, a project called SLATE back in 2018, those things help to specify a lot of LVC kind of requirements that you'll find in HLA, you'll find in DIS, you'll find in several other standards that turn out to be really good transitions, if you will, from the research that we were doing at the time. So very cool stuff. All right, assessment. So you got all the data, you got your conditions for learning, what happens now? Well, so you want to be able to capture the data. And like I said at the beginning, I'm just talking about some of the processes and the capabilities and the targets we used in the research we were doing at the lab. Your targets and opportunities and even your technologies might be different, but it's all about the capacity and the capabilities. So you have your mobile devices, they can generate data, probably not in a classified space, but they can get you data. You have network traffic you can monitor, and then in a lot of cases you can instrument the operators to get physiological data. And if you have the right tools in place, you can bring those all together, those sources of data. And so here's an example of a grade book that was developed for the weapons instructor course for JTACs, but it's an automated tool that allows the instructor to very quickly go through and diagnose performance. He can rate the performance, he or she can rate the performance, but then you can unpack that performance into the things that were not manifest in the actual performance well, and you can use those as lessons learned to target the next part of training. So this is a subjective kind of tool with some objective guidance built into it, baked into it, some anchors and things like that. So that's one way to collect data. You can also collect data with a tool we created called PETS, the Performance Evaluation and Tracking System, which is a system that listens to the network traffic and is able to take the network traffic and according to a set of specified data standards that you create, can actually capture those data, put them in a repository that you can then trend analysis over time, but you can also use for a debrief for that particular scenario. Now, this is a tool that we created in the lab. Like I said, there's some stuff on the floor now that's really kind of including PETS, but there's some other tools on the floor. Doesn't really matter which tool you use, as long as you can get to the kind of precision that you need to have in the data, that's the key. And so we had a process that we created for understanding the scenarios, understanding the metrics, understanding expected performance, and then go through this, we call it a validation process, but it's a validation in air quotes, process to really make sure that we're measuring the right kind of things at the right level of specificity, and then warehousing those things so that we could use them in the ecosystem to not only train, but to diagnose where people are good and not good, and then be able to remediate them in an automated way in either the sim or live environment. And so this is just an example. I think this one you'll have to just hit play. Yep. So it just shows you something that we created called a timeline chart. You see the F-16 or the targeting aircraft. You see the JTAC on the ground. He's lasing now. That's what the dotted lines are. And you see the little house at the end dies. And so now those data are represented here graphically, but behind the scenes, there's lots of the data, very specific data is sitting in a repository that you can then pick up and troubleshoot the performance and see what you want to do better in the next round of remediation. So performance and feedback stuff. So when you have all the data and you get done with a trial, you can give the data to the weapons officer, and the weapons officer can do stuff with it. You can also give it to the flight lead, and you can use those data in the after-action review. And so, again, especially this year, I think there's a sort of a renaissance in some of the tools that are available to be able to do some of these things. And I would encourage you to check out some of the companies on the floor. I won't mention one because I'll miss one and then they'll be all mad at me. So I'll just say there's plenty of people on the floor to go look at. And there's some stuff that we did to create a tool, but it's really more about the capabilities in that tool, not the tool itself. So that tool is called Lynx, the LVC Network Control Suite. And you can see some of the capabilities that it has in it. Some of those capabilities you can find manifest in some of the products you can see on the floor. But we went into this with a couple of different ways of using the tool. We used it for exercise control, so somebody at the console could manage the scenarios as they're executing. We also built in hooks so that if you got to a point where you had some intelligence behind the monitoring the behavior, you might be able to adjust it on the fly, pun intended, without a human. We also wanted to be able to do recording and playback and then visualize the battle space. Some of the components of Lynx are actually still up and running or up and running now at the UAWC. They use it for some of their exercise management, so we're pretty excited about that. That work is continuing on. And it really was a good project to be involved in, and the folks that have now taken on the charge for the future are moving these tools along, as well as exploring lots of other commercial options that are out there. So plenty of exciting stuff happening. So this one should start all by itself. Yep. So this is just how all those pieces fit together in the scheme that we created, but your scheme could be very similar. So a lot of the things that we did in the research, on the research side of things out at the lab when I was there and still continuing today, helped inform the combat air forces move to their future training concept. And that future training concept, no surprise to you guys because of what it's based on, is all about measuring performance. It's all about capturing data. It's all about using the kind of investment that we've made in modeling and simulation to a greater use in terms of readiness and training. It also provides a way to specify how to use the data, when to use the data, why to use the data. And at the time, General Holmes, who was COMAC, so it's back a couple, he was very interested in putting something out from his level that could get out to the ops units so that it could drive them to think about how some of the technologies that were out there, including ours, could be used to get to this place at the squadron level of capability. I'm happy to say that there have been some really forward-leaning squadrons out there who have taken this on, used some tools, sometimes ours, sometimes others, to try and get to a more data-driven kind of capability to understand who knows what and how much of what so they can figure out what to give them next for training. Really nice success stories, and they're using the variety of simulators and part test trainers and the aircraft to do just that. But all that research and development drove the development of this document, a very top-level document on the future training concept, and that's been driving the operational units to do things in a much more data-driven kind of ecosystem and way. Modeling and simulation was a key part of that, the foundation of it all, so it's really kind of cool that we had that kind of success. And so the precision-based strategy concept, some of the key elements are moving away from this sort of one-size-fits-all kind of mindset to actually getting to something that's more tailored. I know that a lot of times the perception is if I go to something that's more tailored training, it's going to take a lot longer, and I'm not going to be able to get the efficiencies. Actually, it's just the opposite, right? So if you have somebody who's already mission ready, they can actually be training the other folks as a subject matter expert, or they can be the flight lead in a sortie to help others that aren't quite getting there to get there faster, and optimize the use of the resources, whether they're live, virtual, and or constructive to make that happen. And then figure out how to make sure you can do that in a secure environment with the realism that you need to have. But it's all part of getting to this point where I can have a scalable modeling and simulation-based ecosystem that goes all the way from the individual to the team and to, in the case of some of the work we did, to coalition and teams of teams. So really exciting stuff and very important to get to this point with the enablers that we created that other people are now creating too and moving this forward. So very exciting time. So on the Combat Air Force side of things, the yellow line represents how things are and how long it takes people to get to a certain point or the resource investment that's needed for that. What we wanted to try and do with PBT was push that curve back the other way. Get people to a higher level of proficiency sooner so that they would be functioning at a much higher mission ready level earlier in their time and then be able to train other folks, but also to be more combat mission ready earlier so that when the phone rings and they got to go out and do something, they have a whole cadre of folks that are definitely ready to go. And this has been successful and has, there's a lot of pieces of this that are working today, including in the Reforge effort that Dave Malik now leads with the folks at ACC at Langley. So very nice success story here, all based on modeling and simulation, performance measurement, and competency-based training. A really great kind of way to put the pieces together in a very novel kind of way. So how it's going to evolve in the field, this is already happening. So we move from a one-size-fits-all in commander's option. We move to something where the machine actually tells you where the gaps are in training and drives the scenarios to be the way you want them to be. And as I mentioned, we've had some success in being able to show how you can capture similar kinds of data, whether you're in the aircraft or in the sim, and be able to tell that story from a data-driven perspective across the range of training options that you have. Also identify what you know and, more importantly, what you don't know and where the deficiencies are. They become unmasked now because I have the data that actually talks about it. And again, you get to this point where it's all scalable. So it's a pretty cool opportunity, and I think it's here now, and it's being implemented, and you can see a lot of it on the floor, but you can also talk to Dave about some of the things that the lab is still doing pretty cool. And, oh, by the way, let me just say, all the instrumentation and all the scenarios and all the other things that I've talked about work in a similar way, not just for training, but also for test and experimentation. Huh? So I mentioned early on that this new thing that stood up as I was leaving, not because he's sitting there, but the Chief Modeling and Simulation Office has this concept called the Modeling Simulation Integration Lab, and and as that lab stands up, one of the key components that will be under the hood in the missile will be the ability to instrument all of the experimentation, all the evaluations, all of the context for the novel technologies that he wants to bring in and integrate and demonstrate to move them closer to a level of maturity and risk reduction that they can get transition. That's one of the goals of the missile. And all that instrumentation will help tell that story from a data-driven perspective. So it works in test and experimentation just like it works in training. Pretty cool. So where we hope to get to is you use your competencies no matter what they are. We want to get you, we used to try to get you way up into the specialized training and all that kind of stuff in the big blue at the top. That's too inefficient. That's over learning, and we just don't have the resources to do that. And nobody's probably going to want to get there. So we try to keep it at the unscientific place called the knee of the curve. But it actually makes sense because that's where you're getting the maximum bend, if you will, in the distribution. And so how do you get there? Well, you use your modeling and simulation technologies and processes. Those are informed by the competency approach that you take and the metrics that you develop. Then you have your ops standards. StanEval makes some of those, but we also make those as part of the measurement system that we create. And the goal is to be able to constantly monitor where people are on this curve at any point in their career from the time they show up to the time they actually leave. And be able to get them closer to being able to perform in that combat relevant environment. And so that's the whole thing as it all lays out. We warehouse the data. It goes all the way back around and feeds the cycle again. It really looks like Chutes and Ladders now. And it's been some great successes, and we learned lots of lessons along the way. So I'm going to talk about some of those here in just a minute. So here's some of the successes that we had. Again, not because he's sitting here and these slides were turned in last week. So I mentioned the missile because that's a thing that the team is moving towards now. It's really a great concept, and it's the perfect place for that to be because you have all the experimentation, all the data, all the training stuff already there. So it makes a lot of sense for it to be there. But a proficiency-based training thought process has been embedded in the Combat Air Force, and there's lots of folks working on that, moving along. We've actually deployed scenarios to lots of places around the planet. Some of our international collaborators are here. They've been a part and parcel of this along the way. Very exciting stuff that we've been able to do. And in my mind, anytime we go to war, we don't go alone. So it's good to train to do the development and train with the folks you're going to go to war with, and what a concept. And so that's what we tried to do, and that's what the team is continuing to do there. But it's a really nice lesson learned over the time that I was working in AFRL. And so here's some things that I've learned that I think are really important catalysts for where we take M&S in the future. So I mentioned the DAF, Chief Modeling and Simulation Office, again, not because the team is sitting there in the front, but he's not the only one. Several of our international partners and several of the services have stood up chief modeling and simulation officers and offices. Why would you do that? Well, you do that because there's a desire to have a vested interest in define equities for modeling and simulation in the service and across the services. Well, how cool is that? And with our coalition partners. The other thing that just happened a month or so back was AFL-CMC stood up a training PEO. Never had a training PEO before. We got one now. How cool is that? Well, that actually pushes the notion of training being an important thing all the way up to the acquisition level. That's a pretty big deal, as most of you know. And then tech and data advances, everything that's going on with speed and power. I had a chance to talk to some of the folks from NVIDIA on the floor, doing some crazy wicked stuff with their chips and things like that. And I mean, you got essentially an HPC on a card, which is really phenomenal. And you can heat your room at the same time, so it's all good. And then you got there's lots of data. Everyone's thinking about data. Everyone's thinking about ways to use data in very creative and different ways. And also it takes a lot of data. You have to have a pervasive data store in order to train AI models and machine learning models for the future. So having those kinds of rich data sources is essential to our future success. And I think there's lots of opportunities there. Smarter automation of key processes. There's a bunch of new work going on in novel algorithm generation. Data management and tagging analytics are coming along. So a lot of us have spent time working with our engineering teams to try and figure out what in a particular set of data actually needs to be classified and managed and not released. And we look at these paper documents that are in some cases 10 years old and have data security requirements for systems we're not even flying anymore. All that stuff is paper-based. So getting a way to get all those things automated so we can actually tag the data, we can actually routinely and very quickly update security classification guides and things based on new information. Gets to that agility thing I was talking about at the beginning. Getting all that stuff done in a more automated way and smarter is really a thing to get after, and I think there are lots of opportunities to do that. Everyone here is talking about AI and machine learning tools, and I call it at scale because it's great to have a little pet rock project, a chat GPT thing you build, but now we're talking about getting serious about having AI be a teammate, AI being an unmanned teammate, flying an airplane that's being coached along by a human, or in some cases not being coached along, but being monitored. And then I'm a big fan of STEM M&S development. You guys know that. We have this gaming lab in Dayton, Ohio that I was a part of when I was there. They have that lab now. It's called The Grill. The Grill is on the floor here at Itsec, back in the STEM pavilion. Oh, and there's some Academy cadets here who were out at the place last summer and did some really cool development work before they went back to the Academy. Check them out. They're in the STEM pavilion, and they're also competing for the Serious Games thing. So drop them a vote and make sure they win. But some really great stuff that I think there's lots of opportunities for continued work. So if you think we're done, we're not. And all you got to do is walk the floor or sit in a couple of presentations or sit in like the Black Swan thing that just happened before us. There's plenty of stuff to get after, no question about that. But we have lots of tools and we have lots of data at hand now. So let's just keep a good thing going. And so I think it's important to think about what it is you're trying to measure. You don't want to grab data just because you can grab data, because then it doesn't make any sense. It's important to make sure that you grab the right data. That's why the competency thing was so important to us, understanding what it is you need to know and be able to do, and then making sure there's data to tell that story. That's kind of the thing. But it's not just about ones and zeros and flipping a switch and that kind of stuff. There's also process. There's things like situational awareness. There's things like tactical employment. Those things are kind of process things, and you want to be able to capture data that represents those things as well. I know I'm talking about tactical kind of things, but you can easily, I know folks in the room here can easily translate to command and control or ISR. The framing is, the process is the same, it's just a different character of data. And making sure that the metrics are good. One thing I'll mention, I was having a conversation with a grad student just a little while ago, and one of the things I said was, well, it's great to just collect the data that you need out of convenience for the question you're trying to answer now. Just keep in mind that if you don't collect data at its more fundamental level, you can't go back and get those data later, right? So you can always aggregate up. You can't disaggregate the data down. You only can get it at the lowest level you collected it at. So keep that in mind. It may take a little more creativity, may take a little more time, may take a bigger hard drive. But the bottom line is, if somebody will ask a question, well, have you thought about this? And that means unpacking the data. If you collected the data way up here and somebody asks a question down here, you might be screwed if you didn't collect the data down here. So think about that. It's an important thing to get after, and it means a lot. The granularity of data is really important. And you got to be able to have a harvestable data. If I know what the data represent and you don't, then it's useless to the vast majority of people. So it has to be understandable. It has to be usable by a wide variety of people for a bunch of really novel kind of things, like the machine learning and AI stuff. And try to figure out what the practice community doesn't have and what are continuing gaps, and figure out how to address those from a data perspective. And then try to figure out how to specify the next things that modeling and simulation needs to get after for both research and practice. Those things are really important in my opinion, and hopefully yours too. But these are real opportunities, and I think there's always plenty to do, and there's a real opportunity here to grab some of these things and keep working on them, because as soon as you get one of these things done, it's like an onion. You peel back it, and there'll be more to do underneath it, just the way it goes. That's one of the exciting parts about the job. And so I've learned a lot of things. M&S is foundational to all of it. No surprise here. But you got to keep pushing it to make it go, and it requires a lot of innovative thought, a lot of innovative practice, a lot of people doing a lot of things. Don't forget the larger communities of science and practice. Sharing is caring. Standards and interoperability matter. So if you're not a member of CISO or SIW, and you only get to Itsec once in a while, change that. Get in early and often and get after it, and get involved in those communities, because they need the help. They need folks to be getting after some of the opportunities that I mentioned before, and it's really important to do that. The next thing is do good things with great people and grab opportunities where you see them. I'm standing here before you just because of that, because there are people in this room I've worked with for some 25 to 30 plus years. I won't call them out, but we've been doing things because it's fun to work together, and we get good stuff done when we do it. It takes a village. Innovation is a team sport, so make sure when you get in it, you stay in it, and realize that everything takes input from everybody else. Make sure you take care of each other. What we do in modeling and simulation is a human endeavor. It's always going to be that way. AI is going to be a great help, but it won't take that human endeavor part away. Keep that in mind. Got to keep that in mind. And finally, something I learned very early on in my career: never forget who you work for. It's not the university, it's not the journals, it's not the conference even, no offense. It's the men and women who are out there to fly, fight, and win better. Everything you do here has to be oriented on that, or you're missing the game. And so keep that in mind. That's really the most important thing, is never forget who you work for. So this is just all the pieces coming together and kind of a summary of the work that I was involved with for the 30+ years I was in AFRO.
Viper, cleared hot. Viper 1 and 2, weapons away, 24 seconds. Both socks, weapons away, 45 seconds.
Both socks, good mom, good mom.
Contact 2 groups committing 03933, 18,000 bogey, reading out both states.
We got a fly power on, health good, and I toggled enable LVC.
We just got word we have Bourbon 1-1 in the area and has eyes on targets. Contact him on Strike Freak. Bourbon 1-1 will have brief stack mark control. All players confirmed.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate the opportunity and the honor. It means a lot to me to be here. There's plenty more to do, so giddy up and let's get after what's next. I really appreciate you being here today. Thanks so much, and thanks a lot for all the partnership and collaboration along the way.
I was trying to give you the sign to stretch it out a little bit. We have plenty of time for questions.
Yeah.
All right, so we do have quite a bit of time left over.
I told you,
For
high bit rate.
questions and answers.
High bit rate, yeah.
We do have 2 microphones available. Do we have those? Who's got the mics? Okay. If we have any questions. So great news. A lot of great content we have here. There will be a paper that is published along with this video presentation. The video will be on the NTSA YouTube channel, NTSA Today. You'll see that on the bottom of some of the slides here. The paper will be presented, will be published. The content in this presentation is based on that paper, so that will have a lot more of this content if you're interested. But we have plenty of time right now for questions and answers. So if we have any questions, let's get the mics out here and ready for, oh, they're over here on the side. So if you've got questions, let's shoot it, fire away.
Wink, I will go first. It's going to be less. It's going to be more about the workforce than it is the warfighter. Your bullet on STEM M&S workforce development. I think you were focused on young engineers. Could you kind of share some of your experiences over the years with your current workforce, the teams you were on, and how you were able to upskill through many? This is not new, having the digital transformation, but how'd you do it over the years? Best practices learned, lessons learned?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Thanks a lot. And I didn't mean to imply it's just for the youngins, because I learn new stuff every day. probably because I'm a psychologist, not an engineer. But the bottom line is, I think what we did was we offered opportunities to get involved in really gnarly kind of projects, really challenging kind of stuff, some things that where there wasn't an answer that was obvious. We were gonna have to look at things and study them. And I had just as many young'uns as I did more senior seasoned engineers jump right in the middle of that and want to learn more to get after it. And when we started having this larger compilation of data, lots of people got really interested in how they could use those data to do a whole variety of things, including something as mundane as just making the CGFs we already had in the bag a little smarter. But even broader than that was coming up with whole new behaviors and whole new things, kind of like DARPA ACE did with EPISCI, to try and look at novel ways to apply the technology in a tactical environment, in our case, in a new way. And I never had any trouble getting young or old involved in that. Everybody was really excited to get involved in some new and gnarly problem. And I think when we start talking about STEM and workforce development, it's all about who you're aiming it at. And I, when I was out at the JITC not too long ago at Nellis, and we were talking about some of the stuff that the SIMSO office and Mike Gooden, the guys are trying to get done in workforce development, it's not necessarily about the youngins. It's about creating the workforce, raising all boats, right? Creating that modeling and simulation workforce for the future. And that includes the folks that are doing the job today, as well as the new folks that you're bringing in. That's probably the best answer I've got. I think if you can provide exciting, cutting-edge work for people, age doesn't matter. What matters is their creativity, their curiosity, and their desire to learn.
Thanks. Great presentation.
Thanks. They just know there's beer at the other end, so.
I don't think this, oh, sorry, it is working.
Hey, Bear.
How you doing, Link?
I'm good, man.
You talked a little bit about DMO and the international community. Where do you think we need to go with that? Because there's been obstacles that we need to overcome.
Yeah, thanks. In fact, just this morning in the RAF discussion, that was one of the central things. You know, we're supposed to all be no secrets, trusted, open kimono, and yet there's this whole infrastructure that says, well, not so fast. And so I think it's still a challenge. I think the best way to get after that, Bear, honestly, is to be able to have examples of successes that we've had, set precedents for things getting done. You know, we're starting this thing, well, it's actually pretty far along now, called Distributed Synthetic Training. That's a follow-on to a project that the NMSG sponsored for a bunch of years called MTDS, Mission Training Through Distributed Simulation. MTDS actually started as a result of an exercise, a 7-country exercise that we were a part of called Exercise First Wave 20 some odd years ago. And we've actually moved the needle on distributed simulation quite a bit from there, but we haven't solved all those problems. But I think it's going in the right direction, and I think setting precedences and having senior leaders not only drive, but be willing to move obstacles out of the way to get things done, to get to the thing they want you to get to, is where we need to get at more. And having more senior leader engagement to try and help change those policies and move things along will get the attention of the folks that are sitting in the middle running the machine, and hopefully get them to come along with us. You know, we've had TDCP for a long time. We've had Five Eyes agreements, as you know. We now have AUKUS, and yet there's still these challenges. And I think what we need to do is identify the issues that are keeping us from doing the things we need to do, show the art of the possible in terms of that from an MS perspective, and get after it.
Appreciate that. Very good presentation, by the way. Good
Thank you, man.
see you.
Thank you. I know you love it. We go back a ways, so, and he still talks to me, so that's a good thing. Anyone else? Yes. Hey.
Could you share some of the lessons learned that you had from, you know, great innovative idea to actually something getting funded, implemented, and used? You know, because we're all aware of that valley of death. You know, the great ideas have a tendency of just tapering off without any effect, and you've had a lot of great success navigating that. Can you share some insights about that, please?
Yeah. Well, truth in advertising, I talked about the successes, but we had plenty of not so great successes because the system just wouldn't let us do it. But we always found a way, with the things that we were able to do, we always found a way to get advocacy from the end user, right? Because we didn't do the typical thing where I invent the technology, it's really cool to me, I know you'll like it, I'll just throw it over the fence. We didn't do that very often, hardly ever as a matter of fact, because we really wanted the operational guys to be involved right from the start. And as you know, the the buildings and the things we did in Mesa, Arizona, and the things we're doing here now were all about that engagement, direct engagement with the end user or potential end user right from the start. One of the nice things that, now it wasn't a problem for us before because we were pretty well connected with the training systems, both the simulators division here before we moved to Ohio, but that relationship has just gotten stronger and even better now. And now that they've split out what used to be WNS into WNS and WNR, I think T2's in the audience somewhere, I thought I saw him earlier, but I think that relationship has just continued to grow, and that's a critical part of it. I think the standing up of a training PEO is a recognition that this is an important area of work and that we need to move things along further. The last thing I'll say, and again, let me just say, not because he's sitting there, but the missile, the Modeling Simulation Integration Lab that SIMSO is sponsoring is directly tied to taking some lab and other kinds of technologies that are pretty mature, but still got some high risk or perceived high risk, bringing them into the missile, being able to work through those, make the technology more mature, demonstrate it in an operational context like JSE or something else, and then be able to find a home for it on the other end, but demonstrate it's not so scary to go there because it already works. You just need to put it in there and go. One of the other things I'll mention that made things a success is and this was a hard fight over the years, as some people in the room know, maintaining the simulator infrastructure that we had in the same baseline OFP as in the field. Right? So that's typically an expensive process, although we had some really good drug deals with the PEOs for F-22, the JPO for F-35, and WNS for F-16. We had some really great deals because they were getting value from the exposure that the operational crews got when they came to run our experiments, because those data came right back to us. That's important for another reason, in addition to having those relationships and being able to work together. The other part of that that's important is that's the same OFP that's in the field. So if I can demonstrate the art of the possible in my AFRL lab, but it's inside the context of the same OFP you have in the field, it's much easier to work with the folks in the program office to get that into the set of requirements for either the next OFP or the next OFP or the next simulator design to make sure that it gets implemented. There's no shortage of work. But like I said about the human endeavor, a lot of those things are just a bunch of the humans in the right place doing the right thing and making sure that the people who are building the capability and looking to transition it are talking to the people who are going to use it at the other end from day one. I think that's critical.
Hey, Wing, thanks again for your service and for the brief. It's Rox Wagman from Alpha Tech.
Yep.
Question that I've got for you is that feedback loop that you have that you're kind of fully developing, bottom left corner where you've got the feedback that goes back into, where are we starting from the requirements. Have you found, or are you using any of that kind of feedback out of the outcome to say, here is the level of fidelity that we need in the sims in the training to say, is it worth the cost value that we're getting, say, for JSC, especially as you get into security barriers that you talked about, and where the connectivity piece beats the travel to get there piece, where you talk latency of EW, like how short am I going to go milliseconds of feedback in the sim versus now I can't connect across the country, that kind of thing, to try and set that baseline of what's the best value for return. Everything costs money, and where are we getting that? Have you seen any of that work?
So I'd love to tell you an F-35 story, but I don't have one. But we've got the F-35 community now asking to do the mission essential competencies approach that I had. One of the inside the weeds part of that is we when we collect all the data from going out to talk to the ops guys and we produce the final set of data materials, we bring some of the ops guys back in, guys and gals, and we have them go through and help us interpret the data that we saw. And a lot of times, we'll get ratings on the particular use of a training environment like a sim or an aircraft. It doesn't give you the kind of value that you need to have to train this, so we call that a training gap. And then what we get the operational folks to do is to define what that gap is actually caused by. And I found it very useful because in the case of the F-22, for example, and some of the early DMO with the F-16 and AWACS too, we found out that the network was actually causing a lot of the problems and impeding our ability to get the training done. And so now the program office has actual data and they have operators that understand the challenge they're facing and the gap they're facing. They can try to figure out what the best value solution is to get that fixed. I've wanted to do the F-35 environment for a couple of years now because I think we'll learn a lot. Part of the way we got to JSE was the fact that the architecture wasn't good enough to support the high-end models that you needed to move around. Well, wouldn't it be nice to have actual data from the operators and maybe even data from the sim environments to show that, so that now you understand the problem at a ones and zeros level, and now you can figure out how to get after it. And how to get after it may be that I put some of those critical pieces not on the network but on-prem, right where you are. And I distribute pieces of that, but I keep most of this right at home station. I know that's not the total distributed solution, but I think it's a way to get there because the Trons aren't having to hop across the country, they're just having to hop across the room. No small challenge there, especially with very complicated models. But if they got to do the F-35 competency work, I think what we would discover is there are a lot of training gaps that are caused by that kind of infrastructure a gap or inability to support, and then you can figure out, well, how to fix it, right? And so I think, yes, we learned a lot, and we used that feedback quite a bit with the program office to help them identify ways to get that fixed, and I'd love to do that for the 35 because I see lots of opportunity there. Does that answer your question? Great.
Hey, Wink.
Hey.
I feel like your answer to the longest pole in the tent would be policy and bureaucracy, but what would you say would be for where we're wanting to go from here is longest pole in the tent from the science and engineering side?
So I think it's yes and no. I think there are science and technology gaps that we need to get after. I touched on some of those in the opportunities I see. But I think Moore's Law is taking care of a lot of things like having the ability to process large language models in something close to real time with enough data, those kind of things. I think we're getting there, and so that's freaky good. But I do think there's still a whole lot of things that are policy driven, and they're policies from old school. So when I talk about cognitive agility in the warfighter, we need cognitive agility in the policy and doctrine thing because they're way behind. And when somebody says, oh, I can't manage the data because it's all secure, yes, you can. It's ones and zeros. Figure it out. It's not rocket science. And I'm a psychologist saying that. Hopefully the engineers would agree. But I think there's a real opportunity to re-engineer the policy so it matches not only the demand we have given the global peer competition, but also because they haven't changed in 30 years. And there are some people in policy that want to make changes. They really want to make changes, and they're not risk averse, but everyone around them sure is, and they're not letting them get to the light of day. And so I think there's lots of policy stuff that needs to get pushed around and taken apart and put back together in a 21st century way. Otherwise, we can't get where we want to go.
Awesome. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Hey, Wink.
Yes, sir.
Could you elaborate on the importance and effectiveness of beer and how it has played to your many effective studies?
So, yes, I can, as a matter of fact.
Absolutely.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to go back. There was way back at the beginning of the talk when I was talking about competencies. This was a long-standing conversation that we had over what the mech logo would look like. And if you're an average beer drinker, you might notice that that's hops and barley on both the right and left side, because those are essential to opening your thought process. Having a beer with people in the field is essential to opening your thought process in order to come up with the best innovation. Always have beer. And in fact, when a bunch of years ago, I got recognized with an award at AFRL, and they dropped out most of my pictures of our international work because they were taken in pubs. And they go, well, we can't promote alcohol consumption. But that's where the stuff happened. I mean, out of that meeting came a cocktail napkin that led to this and that and the other. Yeah, well, and so yes, thank you for that. It's essential to lubricating the thought process to make things go the way you want them to go. Bourbon does that too, I've discovered since I deployed to Kentucky. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for all the great work you've done for all of the aviators and Air Force in general.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks. That means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Wink. That was a great presentation, and just thank you from me. So if you don't know me, I'm the Chief Learning Officer for the Air Force, which is a very big job to come in from outside. And you have been so welcoming and been such an incredible role model. And to sit through this presentation and to see your impact on all of this is just beautiful. I think you're a role model, and I try to walk in your footsteps. I'm also now a bourbon drinker, so I'm already taking more steps than I thought.
There you go. There you go.
My question, though, is about people and about the workforce, and you talked about, you briefly mentioned your psychology roots. And I'm thinking about what sort of things can we do wherever we sit in our roles to inspire people to unleash their creativity and to be bold. I can't tell you how many Teams meetings I sit in and people just have their initials on a little square, and then the meeting ends and I never heard anything, even though I know they're wicked smart and they have amazing things to say. So how can we create kind of that psychologically safe space that you have, but how can we create that across all the services, across industry, across academia?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. Thank you for the kind words. It's been a great collaboration. Thank you for that. I will say that one of the things I really liked, it was a few years ago now, the Air Force made a conscious decision to focus on innovation. They set aside money. They set aside money to fund spark tanks. They set aside money to fund innovation cells and innovation working groups in all the MAGCOMs. And the innovation just came out of the woodwork. It was always there, but it never could leak out because there was no motivation to do that, and there was no incentive to do that. And so we had these spark tanks, and you remember they had the spark tank competition, and you had guys like the Secretary of the Air Force at the time, and the SecAF and all that kind of stuff show up at the things, and he had guys like the guy from Shark Tank show up and was one of the judges, right? And you have these airmen who came up with this idea that was purpose-driven, right, in the field. And other airmen would see that, and they would go, man, I got an idea for this or that or the other. I heard that the innovation funding had kind of taken a bunch of hits, and there wasn't a lot of it around anymore. And I think that's a real shame, because I think one way to motivate people and to make them less risk-averse, and maybe even the people around them in leadership, is if you could bring in some cash to allow them to turn loose on their idea and just see where it can go. It's not that I think the commanders don't want to do it. I think they do. It's just they're hard-pressed to meet the mission requirements they have with the few dollars they have. And I think somebody putting the money into an innovation fund that promotes the spark tanks, maybe spark tanks should be a part of every operational organization in the Air Force. Or, I don't know, maybe so. But those spark tanks with some funding that people can compete for, they're more than happy to compete, I think is a real way to inspire those kids to get after that. I think that's one way. Another way is I think we could do a better job of talking about the fun you can have being in the Air Force. And supporting the mission. It's a blast. I mean, I'm excited. I'm excited to come to work every day. Again, not because he's sitting there, but I'm excited to come to work every day because I get to do fun stuff. I've always gotten to do fun stuff. We've been very fortunate in that regard, all the folks that we've gotten to work with. And I think having leadership that recognizes there's fun stuff to do and allowing people to have and enjoy that fun stuff, I think is a critical thing we want to get after. And there's lots of kids out there that are really smart, but they're not thinking about the military or the DoD as a space. Some of that might be due to just attitudes on what our mission actually is, but I think more of it has to do with they think they can make a whole lot more money and do pretty cool stuff working for Google and Apple. And some of that's probably true, but you won't have fun and you won't get to do the kind of things that we do there, because they just don't do those things. And so if you want to do this kind of stuff, I think it's incumbent on all of us to do a better job of letting people know what the inspirational opportunities are, and then watch the people come in, because they will. And if they know there's a way for me to take an idea to some level of maturity in one of these spark tank things, because there's a pool of guaranteed funding there that we can use at the MAGCOM level or the squadron level to get after that, I think those things would really help sort of knock down some of those roadblocks and encourage the next generation of folks to want to innovate and come in. Was that good? Did that answer your question? Yep. I don't have a check. If I had a checkbook, if I won the lotto, I'd send some money to the SecAF right now and say, hey, put this into innovation cells across the Air Force. But I remember it was a big, like a rock concert thing, these competitions, right, with big celebrities on the stage and picking airmen from some operational unit who had come up with a ladder that folds into a map case or whatever it was, and they would compete. And it didn't matter who won or lost. They got in front of these venture capitalists to talk about their ideas and then show what they had done. And so the enthusiasm is out there, the motivation's out there. I think we on the leadership side can do more to promote the enthusiasm that's there and unpack it and give it a chance to breathe. Great question. Thank you.
All right, well, let's give Wink a big round of applause. Great job, my friend.
Thanks. Thank you.
I can't thank Wink enough, the short notice that we gave him this year, and I'm going to use this as a shameless plug for next year's fellow nominations. Those are due on April 1st, so now you start thinking about people like Wink that are in your organizations that have made the kind of contributions that we've seen and heard about here today. And on the Itsec website, there are criteria. We have gone to great lengths to make sure that it's very clear and transparent on how we select the fellow. So Wink exemplifies the person we are looking for. So please check out our website, go to the Itsec.org website, check out, search for fellow, or just search Itsec fellow, and that criteria is out there. And we need more Winks up here in future years. So thank you for your contributions.
Thanks.
We thank you for your friendship, and most of all, thank you for your dedication to this country, my friend.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you.
God bless America. Thank you.